You may go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. And as always, it's an honor to be in your presence as a committee, and thank you for your support over the years. As I understand it, you have asked us to present for our FY 2020 budget. And Mr. Chairman, I think you also indicated earlier that you wanted to have some discussion about the audit, and I'm happy to discuss that if that's still your wish. Our budget request, as submitted, asks for an increase of $420,000, and add 478 to that. But all that's passed through and formula funding. We requested no additional new revenues, new appropriations. So I'll go through the amounts and how we got there. First, the program amount for increased mileage for our judges who live outside the radius and qualify for per diem. We knew at the time of our budget submission that Judge Ellington would be coming onto our court and he would qualify, so we have in our budget request included $36,000 for his per diem. We also have pass-through funds for our state trooper in the amount of $3,986. And we have the funding for National Center for State Courts. That's based on population, and that provides membership for the entire judiciary. That's within the Supreme Court budget as the figurehead of the judiciary, but that provides for services for the entire judiciary. We also have an increase in our rent of $372,000. Even there, that's the largest increase in our budget. That's 2.57% increase. A good chunk of that is for common area space in the new building, consistent with the position that we hold within the judiciary. The common space is placed under our budget, so you'll see a bigger increase in rent under our budget. And so that makes up the $420,000 that we have as an increase. Since the time of budget submission, we've also added another judge that qualifies for the per diem, and that's Justice Bethel, who lives in Dalton. And so if we accommodate for him pro rata for the budget year, we would ask for $23,000, $23,096 to be more specific, to be added to our budget submission to account for the new justice that qualifies for per diem. That makes our total request to be $443,574. Even with all the formula funding that we have and no additional requests for appropriations, that's a 3.06% increase. So it doesn't take much for our budget to get into the 4 or 5% range. So with no new appropriations, we end up with a 3.06% increase in our budget submissions. I'll pause right there and answer any questions you might have as it relates to the budget. And then, Mr. Chairman, if you prefer, we can discuss the audit.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. There was an issue that was raised during our full appropriations committee meeting regarding the furniture for the new building.
Yes.
Is it? I think it would be appropriate now to just talk about that. That is not included within this budget, and could you explain?
That is within the that has already been appropriated. I believe it's $8 million. That's in the GBA budget. That is sufficient, we believe. We intend to come below those figures. We're going to take every piece of furniture that is worthy of the new building and reuse those, repurpose those for the new building. We'll need new furniture and fixtures for the common space. There'll be some furniture that's not suitable for the new building that we'll seek to replace, and then there'll just be some new pieces added to fill new spots. But the amount that has been appropriated is sufficient.
We appreciate you being cautious with the expenditure of the money towards that purpose. I know that you're being conservative in your expenditures, and you're trying to use what we can use when we transition over.
Yes, sir.
So I appreciate that very much. Questions from members of the committee regarding the budget? Then we'll turn our attention to the audit. As the committee is aware, the Senate had requested an audit, and of course the Department of Audits and Accounts performed an audit regarding the appellate courts of the state, Supreme and Court of Appeals. And in that, there was several recommendations that came out of that report. A few of them dealt primarily with, I think, the interest of trying to combine some of the personnel service, some of the central office staff, not central office, but dealing with HR, also with procurement, as well as possibly IT. And there's some analysis done with respect to those items whereby the auditors were suggesting that there may be some cost savings and personnel savings where the courts combine their staffing in respect to payroll, HR, procurement, and then IT. If you could speak to those items, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Chairman, as you indicated, the audit was requested by the Senate largely to look at the extent to which the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court could benefit from shared services in the back office operations. On the front end, let me say this. We thought both the Court of Appeals and our court felt like the audit team was very thoughtful. They were very thorough. They tried to understand how we operated. They heard us, and we felt like they treated us in a very professional manner. There are some tweaks that we might suggest to the report, but bottom line, that's more wordsmithing and being a technocrat. But big picture-wise, we felt like they were very fair in how they treated us. Our response to the audit and our response to you is a combined response on behalf of the Court of Appeals and our court. We've worked very closely together in this process. I also think it bears mentioning that the overall starting point in the audit report starts off with the notion that both courts operate in a very tight fashion. There was not a lot of overlap. The staffing levels were appropriate for the level of size of both institutions, and if anything, we operated understaffed. The workload was higher than other agencies of our size. So with that, there are two areas that I think the audit focused on as opportunities that might exist for increased efficiencies. And the first is in the audit function. And again, the audit found that each court accounting workload is generally higher than other similarly sized entities. So on the fiscal side, I think the report kind of focused on at one level at the macro level. Within the fiscal operations, there's the vouchers, the voucher functions, paying the bills, payroll levels of operations, travel reimbursements, and then processing fees. So that's basically the list of operations that exist within the fiscal office itself for both courts. Both courts operate with 3 employees. And the report suggested that if we combine fiscal officers, we would go from 3 employees in each court to 6 employees total. And so what we're talking about there is not increasing or decreasing the number of employees. What that approach would do, if anything, would generate some focus levels of operations. Right now, we have 3 people in our fiscal operations in each office that operates and performs on each of those functions, so they multitask. If you combine, the idea is that they wouldn't have to multitask as much. They'd be focused on payroll exclusively or vouchers exclusively. Don't know if that results in the kind of benefits that we were looking for, but we have some suggestions that we think might work. That was one suggestion they threw out. The other suggestion they threw out in the audit was to use the payroll and travel services of the state accounting office. They felt like that might increase our efficiencies. Neither court liked that idea, particularly because it makes us more removed from the payroll and reimbursement processes. It's probably going to be slower, and it's another layer of administration that we probably couldn't avoid. What we do think might work is somewhere in between, and this is an area that I think we have suggested to the audit team and to you in the past that we think might have some promise. And that is, as it relates to the human resources and payroll, we think there can be some benefit to combined services. Neither court has a human resources operation right now or an individual dedicated to human resources. The audit points out that in operations of our size, that's fairly rare. We both anticipate in the future asking for somebody to asking for funding so we could hire an HR person. And what we're talking about at that point is somebody who can handle recruitment, posting of openings, somebody who could onboard new hires, somebody who could do the orientation, somebody could do the benefits training and the benefits processing each year when it comes time for benefit selection, and somebody who could do payroll. And those kinds of things can be done collectively and jointly. They don't have to be customized for each court. At some level, as it relates to payroll, at some level as it relates to human resources, there is a need for more of a customized, high-level fiduciary type role for each court. We each would like to have our own person that we can go to on more of a confidential basis. But the low-level operational aspects, the more ministerial functions could be combined, and we think when we come to you in the future, whether it's next year or the year after, we would have a real solid proposal as how those services and functions could be combined. Lastly, I would say the audit did focus on the IT. And what has happened with IT is both courts now have separate platforms. There are areas where we have combined services and have benefited from the others' work, but in terms of the actual operations, the Court of Appeals operates on the Novell system. I think that system has been procured or bought by somebody else, so it operates under a different name now, but they have a Novell platform. We have switched to our Microsoft platform, and as long as we have those separate platforms, combining operations will remain difficult. There are some things that we can do and continue to do, such as we buy video equipment and things along those lines. We can make sure we have conversations and leverage our buying power when we perform those purchases. We use the same vendor for our operating systems, for our docketing system. So when we upgrade our docketing system, our case management system, if the Court of Appeals wants to benefit from those upgrades, it's already developed to some degree, so that reduced the time and cost for those developments. And vice versa, when the Court of Appeals has made upgrades, we've been able to benefit from those as well. And so we will continue to do that. All in all, I think if there are opportunities for combining services, they exist primarily in the payroll and in the HR space. I also want to point out that the audit did not focus on shared services outside of the Court of Appeals, but just so you know the flavor of how we operate as a court, our deputy clerk and who works under Ms. Barnes here is also the clerk that operates for the Judicial Qualifications Commission. So we've shared services outside of the Court of Appeals with the Judicial Qualifications Commission. And our deputy clerk also supports the special master who handles the attorney disciplinary cases presented to us from the state bar. And our IT services provide 100% of the IT services for the Board of Bar Examiners, which test lawyers coming into the bar and determining the fitness for the bar. So there's a lot of synergies that we've been able to take advantage of, even outside of combining services between the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. So I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. I appreciate the thoroughness of that report. Vice Chair Rogers.
Thank you. Mr. Chief Justice, I just want to clarify something. When you're talking about the 6 people and the sharing of the services or whatever, I don't want to just, I guess to sum it up, would it be fair to say that what you think is that your personnel would be better off having an overall view of the whole thing rather than specializing in something, which I think most businesses now are going to a cross-train sort of thing rather than getting away from it. And it would seem to me, in order to eliminate some of the bureaucracy or whatever, there's people that cross-train and everything to where they could make their own decisions without having to go to someone else.
Yes,
Am I correct?
You make a very good point. There is definitely some benefits to not being too pigeonholed, and efficiencies gained by cross-training for sure.
I'm a big believer in less bureaucracy and more people being able to make some decisions. So
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and other members that are here. You mentioned the possible need in the future for HR person. how many people are we talking about, and what's the size of the payroll?
For both courts, about 200
200.
employees. Yes.
Okay. I'm just out of curiosity, with 200 people, especially with some of the complexities and the type people you're looking for, what took y'all so long to say you needed a human resources person?
We've always been trying to focus on priorities and get by with what we can. And we are at the point now, as you mentioned, that's next up.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Let me also just provide some background for the new members of the committee. Since coming on as chair of this subcommittee, what I've tried to do with our courts is work out a long-term strategic plan. So ask them for what is a 5-year plan, so that we would know over time what their priorities are and not just year to year. Both courts have been exceptionally receptive to that approach. And that's why you see in this budget that they're not asking for anything. It is part of their strategic planning to ask for when they're ready and need someone. Also, I think it bears witness that as to the audit report, both courts are contemplating how best to adjust and fulfill recommendations that may be made in this report. So going to Representative Williams's point, it does appear that there is a need for an HR person, whether or not that person can, and actually the report recommends 2. Whether that one HR person can be brought in to service both courts jointly for a period of time, and then a second one brought in at a later date, seems like a stepwise and a penny saved going into this process. Looking at the report, it was important to see how the courts responded to the suggestions made, and the report analyzed, I think it was 5 different questions that were raised by the Senate Appropriations Committee, and they were very wide-ranging in the content sought to be analyzed. The Supreme Court, in both courts, in responsiveness to that, provided an affirmative statement that they did agree with some of the combined services, as the Chief Justice has stated, in terms of combining ministerial functions, human resource and payroll processes. The Supreme Court acknowledged that the courts would be beneficial to the courts in combining those respective fiscal offices. And then there would be, but as to IT, it was very clear both to the auditors and to the analysis provided, or the response provided by the courts, that there really would not be much savings in that respect. That because they're on 2 different platforms, the need for having separate IT departments made sense. I will note that there was discussion in the report that if their the IT systems were put on a parallel track, or they both had, I know you have 2 different contracts, and I think this is the same vendor, but 2 different contracts in terms of services provided, that there may be in the future an opportunity to try to streamline that and to create a uniform system. And so I mention all that just to say that it is clear from the report that the requests were thoughtful in terms of the Senate's request, but that the courts both had very measured responses, and also were willing to work with the recommendation of the auditors to try to streamline things going forward. So I thought it was a very helpful exercise in both parts, and you've heard the recommendations that the Chief Justice has said that they're interested in pursuing. It will be our job going forward to work with both courts on achieving that goal, and that's going to take a stepwise approach. As you see, it's not in this budget for 2020 for the Supreme Court, but we will need to be looking at it probably the next large budget, at least with respect to HR.
Mr. Chairman, can I add 2 other points along those lines? You mentioned the 5-year plan, and the HR position is outlined even in advance of the audit in our 5-year plan. The second thing is that where we do combine services, we do have a model that both courts look to as the model that we think makes sense with our court reporter, Office of Court Reporter of Decisions, or something along those lines. We have an office that's placed under the Supreme Court. We hire, and both courts go to that office for services without the interference of the other. That would be the model that both courts would be comfortable with moving forward, where we do combine.
And then in terms of procurement, we've discussed this before. You've recently hired a new procurement officer.
Yes.
And that was no position. I think, Ms. Barnes, you and your staff were handling that previously. Obviously, with the move to the new building, there are far more requirements in that process. I would be interested in seeing how much that need remains over time.
Yes, sir.
So I think that's something to just bear in mind.
Right. I think the audit was less than definite in that space, largely because we just now brought in our procurement person that you generously gave us last year. So we don't know where that's going. We don't know what it looks like once we get into the new building. So I understand the question, Mr. Chairman.
And that may be another place where combined services is very helpful.
Yes, and we'd be open to that as well.
I did want to also point out, just because I think it's important to note, and I think you were alluding to this, Mr. Chief Justice, and that is that even with the small percent increase of 3% that you're adding, because that's per diem largely, and then of course there's some adjustments for statewide, and the general need to raise the salaries of the state patrol, the troopers that are assigned to the court. But even with this very modest increase in terms of the budget, it should not, the public and the members of the committee should not be misled by the report statements as to increases in budget over time. So there is some information in here concerning that, in which there were 2 large years of significant increases, a 16% increase, and I forget the other increase percentage. I think it was 13% for the Court of Appeals. But in those 2 years, that was 16 and 17, it was a 20% increase in Court of Appeals. But those were the years also that we expanded the Court of Appeals.
That's correct.
And then we also made the jurisdictional adjustments between the 2 courts and expanded it on the Supreme Court. So when you look at the report, bear that in mind, that those 2 were anomaly years, but they were largely created by the legislation we have passed.
That's correct.
Questions or comments from members of the committee? All right, and if anyone on the committee would like to review those audit reports, Courtney or Brian can make those available to you to look at.
Always a
Chief
pleasure,
Justice,
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next on our agenda is we have our Judicial Council. Our presenter, I believe, will be Justice Boggs. Cynthia Clanton is our Executive Director. Leah Wilson is our Budget Director. Will she be joining us? Good. Hey, good. And then we will have some questions about the kinship care legal services, and so I believe that Peter Fail and Stephen Gottlieb are here. Is that correct?
They are.
Good, thank you. Good. So I do want to make sure that we touch on those issues, and then also George Bastow talking about Georgia's Judicial Gateway.
Correct.
Okay, good. George here. And then also we may speak a little bit about the CPRS, and Jerry Bruce, is he here to talk about that? Okay.
Is Jerry here?
Okay.
Good to be here.
So with that, Chief Justice Boggs, thank you very much. Ms. Clanton, thank you so much for being here. Ms. Wilson, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate the time and the service you provide to the state of Georgia on behalf of the Judicial Council. And if you would, just walk us through your request, and let me get us all to the same page here. Let's see. Section 6, I believe is.
6.4, I believe it is, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
So section 6, page 2 of your track sheet. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chief
Mr.
Justice.
Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I'm honored to be here, and I too appreciate your public service. Thank you for what you do for the citizens of this state. I have the pleasure of chairing the Judicial Council Standing Committee on the Budget and would like to present to you today the budget requests for this year. These requests are prioritized in our budget. There are 3 enumerated requests. They are all important programs for the Judicial Council, and I want to thank you all for your support of the initiatives of the Judicial Council over the years. Chairing the Judicial Council Standing Committee on the Budget is but one of the responsibilities that I have. As you know, members of the Supreme Court chair many of these types of committees, but also are involved in committees on justice for children and committees on access to justice, and we all have these administrative responsibilities. In short, the Judicial Council is requesting $1,078,885 to fund their fiscal 2020 budget for 3 projects. This represents an 8.37% increase to the Judicial Council's annual budget. The first request is $750,000 in continued funding or continuation funding for legal services to kinship care families. Let me basically set the stage for you for this. We've had a precipitous increase in the number of children in Georgia in foster care. In 2013, roughly 7,000 children were in foster care in the state of Georgia. In 2017, that number was over 15,000. About 877 children went into foster care in just a 4-month period leading up to that high water mark. In addition, whether attributable to drug addiction or incarceration, we're seeing a significant increase, therefore, also in the number of children that are not in the foster care system, but that are living with relatives, extended family members, whether grandparents. In fact, there was a study in 2016 that suggested that in Georgia, roughly 41,000 grandparents in Georgia were raising their grandchildren. These are not implicating yet the foster care system, but are likely to if we cannot address that situation. So with those numbers in mind, the $750,000 request for kinship legal services to kinship care families would be in the form of grants. You all may remember that in 1999, beginning in 2020 or 2000, this General Assembly appropriated funds to provide legal services for victims of domestic violence, and that is a program that is a grant program administered by the Administrative Office of the Courts through the Judicial Council. It's been very successful. This would emulate basically that program, and so what we would do here is this $750,000 would be a grant program administered by the Administrative Office of the Courts, just like the Victims of Domestic Violence grant program. It would be administered in all 49 judicial circuits across the state of Georgia, and it would provide legal services to these families who are raising maybe even not their kids. It says a kinship care program, but in fact, we have relatives, neighbors that are raising children. They can't sign the children up for peach care. They can't get the children housing issues resolved. They can't get protective orders on behalf of these children to protect them from sometimes non-custodial parents. They cannot get any of the legal services that they need. So these programs, which have been really emulated after a very successful program by Atlanta Legal Aid, and Steve Gottlieb is here to speak to that, would provide legal services. In essence, this money would provide services to about 1,500 children over the next year. And it would, in large part, prevent a lot of these children from being forced into our foster care system, which is already overrun with an enormous number of children. The types of legal services, as I've mentioned, would include adoptions and legal guardianship documents, as well as documents that would allow custodial parents or custodial guardians to have legal services available to the children that they take care of. And so that, in a gist, is what the $750,000 is for. I will tell you that Atlanta Legal Aid has a kinship care unit to address these sorts of things. And just in 2017 alone, that kinship care unit, which only has 2 lawyers and 1 paralegal, as I recall, gave aid to 224 families affecting 457 children just here in the Atlanta area. Importantly, 75% of this money would go to rural Georgia because it's going to be poverty-based. So 75% of the money would be pursuant to poverty guidelines. 25% would be awarded to special needs. That's homeless and rural counties with fewer than 10 attorneys. In essence, what you would get for this are legal services of about 10 lawyers across the state, providing very significant legal services to these children that, again, are not yet in the foster care program but are poised if we don't do something to help them to implicate that system. Atlanta Legal Aid has provided just a snippet that if you were able to, through this program, to keep 1/4 of these children out of the foster care system, it would save the state in per diem paid to foster care parents roughly $3.7 million. So just keep in mind that the cost of the foster care system are significant, and some of that could be avoided through this program. So that is the kinship care program. Steve Gottlieb is here to talk about the Atlanta version of that. The Atlanta Legal Aid would be eligible to be one of the grant recipients, as they already are for the domestic violence grant program. Judge, who is here? Billy Boyette is here, who is the chair of the grant program. If you have any questions of how that program works, But the idea would be to roll this out across the state and implicate children that are in all parts of the state, predominantly where poverty levels are most high. So that is the kinship care request, $750,000. The second request is $250,000 in continuation
Justice
funding.
Boggs,
Yes, sir.
may I let Representative Williams jump in? I think he
Yeah,
has a
sure.
question about this particular
Yeah.
item.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question about, Justice, about the kinship care. You mentioned that it will be made available in rural areas where there are less than 10 lawyers, which is interesting. I've got a semi-rural area, and I've got one law firm that's got 10 lawyers.
Yes, sir.
So why should my rural people in the rural parts of Liberty County not have access because they're a little too big to be called rural and too rural to be called city?
No, sir, they would have access based on poverty guidelines. It's not limited to just jurisdictions that have less than 10 lawyers. I will tell you, my former judicial circuit had 6 counties near you in southeast Georgia, and at least 3 of those counties had less than 10 lawyers overall. They would still qualify too, of course, but this is not limited to just jurisdictions that have fewer than 10 lawyers.
I believe your opening statement said that this grant money would be available for every single circuit.
It would be. It would be
Yeah, but
available in every judicial
Maybe
circuit.
I
in the state.
misunderstood you because later on you talked about less than 10 lawyers, because not
That's
the
only
opening
25% of this funding.
25% of this funding. will go to-
75% of the funding would be based solely on poverty levels, which largely would be 68% of the state's residents outside the Atlanta 5 areas would be eligible for this funding.
Okay.
So that's,
Good.
thank you for the question and clarification. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy as we go along to answer questions on the three topics, and I'll pause at this point and ask if anybody has any on the kinship care program.
Yeah, while we're here on the kinship care, any other questions from this? Because I think it's an important, I have a couple of questions, and I'll let others think about their questions. But how is success going to be measured with this program? I mean, with any grant program, what we always like to do is to see to what extent and to what extent the success is measured, because we want to make sure that we're having a return on investment. And in part, going to what Representative Williams is saying is that not only with respect to each applicant or each recipient of the grants in terms of that, but geographically, where is it being applied, and what are the results that we're seeing in terms, and it sounds like from your presentation that part of the return on investment will be whether or not children are avoiding the foster care system or not. And so that's, to me, that's if you could elaborate on that, I think it would be helpful.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So within the budget package that we submitted, we outlined how the performance measures would indeed be measured to evaluate the impact of this program. And we indicated at that point that providers, that is the providers and recipients of the providers of the services and the recipient of the grant proceeds would be required to measure the success of the project by reporting semi-annually to the Judicial Council on a number of factors, including the numbers of children and at-risk families served, the types of legal representations provided, and also report on the demographics of those served, including geographic location, gender, and racial breakdown. So we would have the information, I presume, and I'm presuming here that is the same sort of data that we collect in the domestic violence grant programs as well, in order to measure.
But we also get what services were provided.
Legal services that are provided. And I did not mention this, but I mentioned to you all the types of legal services that these providers nonprofits would provide to these children and the families of these children. There are some things they're not going to be able to provide, and I think it's equally important for me to outline for you that there are 3 areas. Predominantly, they're not going to be able to provide legal representation in criminal cases. They're not going to be able to use grant funds to provide legal representation in juvenile delinquency cases. They're not going to be able to use the funds to provide legal representation in deportation proceedings. They're not going to be able to provide any money to provide services for class action lawsuits and that sort of things. These are very focused on giving the kinship care provider the legal documentation and authority that they need in order to give the children the services they need, whether it's peach care or signing them up for school, admitting them to a hospital, getting a temporary protective order to the extent as necessary. Sometimes that's easy for a grandmother to do. Sometimes it's difficult. And in the past, there are no legal services available for those sorts of things in our communities. And so I think it is likewise important that you know what the money can't be used for. Other questions, Mr. Chairman?
Other questions from members? All right, seeing none at this time, there may be some that come up. Let's talk about the increase for the single sign-on portal.
Sure. So, if you will, this is a request for $250,000 in funding for a one-of-a-kind judicial gateway. Portal, I think, is an overused term. We call it a gateway. If you will just think of Travelocity, right? You go to one spot to get the hotel and the rental car and all of the other services you might get. It's been called Judicial Google. So if you think about this being one place that you could go to find all of the services, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a citizen. For example, if you got a uniform traffic citation in Brunswick and you did not know where to go to pay the fine or to show up in court and contest the matter, many of the calls that the administrative office of the court now gets are questions from people who have received traffic citations not knowing what to do with that traffic citation. What court has jurisdiction? Where am I supposed to go? So essentially, this sort of portal, we call a gateway, which is up and running, would be a single sign-on and would allow a lawyer in Brunswick, for example, to get e-filing documents done in Cobb County, to search the e-file documents in Cobb County, all with one single sign-on, even though we all know that each of these jurisdictions uses different management information systems. And so I brought a copy just to give you an idea because I looked at this morning. This is one of the pages from the sign-on portal, and if you can see this, it shows a link to the Judicial Council, to e-court or e-file documents, to court records, to child support calculator, to services for Georgia Legal Services, to a public defender's link, to the Supreme Court of Georgia link, and to georgia.gov. At the bottom, it also has links to find your court, get your driver's license reinstated, the Georgia Department of Corrections, the Sex Offender Registry. It is a one-stop shop for the citizens of this state, but also for the lawyers of this state to go through one portal, sign on one time, and then have access to all of the various documents that they're going to need in order to use that program. So it's $250,000. I can give you some statistics. Since we've been up and running, the Gateway has seen 62,194 sessions with 52,149 visitors. Most of those visitors connect through georgiacourt.gov. There were 8,216 referrals to the site from other sites, and approximately 50% of the people that are accessing this site are doing so through a mobile device. So in this day and age, and this technology is available, we hope that future expansion would allow for search and pay for citations, so you could actually pull up your citation in whatever part of the state you got it. Maybe driving back from a Georgia game, you don't live in Lawrence County, and maybe you want to take care of that without going back to Lawrence County. You could search for and pay that citation online. You could reinstate your driver's license, and of course, e-filing for both appellate courts, my court, the Supreme Court, and the Court of Appeals. So it provides one-stop shopping, if you will, for the lawyers and citizens of this state. And that is the Gateway Project request that the Judicial Council is requesting. Any questions?
How long has that been running?
Jorge, how long has it been up and running?
Live in the fall of 2018.
And what was the initial expenditure for that startup?
We received a $500,000 appropriation. The majority of that was used for the actual single sign-on technology.
Hold on, go ahead, Jorge, use the mic right there.
Sorry. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
So there was an initial allocation to the Judicial Council Technology Committee of $120,000, and that was used for the conceptual design. This was all originated, the Gateway was originated based on the desire for the state of Georgia to build e-filing for the entire state. After the committee reviewed this, it already existed. There was a lot of vendors that were already doing e-filing. There was a lot of local jurisdictions that were already doing e-filing. So this concept of a gateway was to link to those existing vendors. Instead of recreating the wheel and writing competing software, we want to work with those partners, with those public and private partners, to direct traffic to them, create awareness through a gateway so it's a single entry point. You don't have to know who the vendor is or what technology they use in a particular county. We can direct them to that.
Now, this request here, is this going to be an ongoing request?
Yes, sir. The $500,000 that I had alluded to was pilot money. We contracted with a company called Appropriations to do the actual single sign-on. The way this works is we partnered with the state bar. 60,000 attorneys in the state of Georgia now have a login because of this single sign-on. If you have a bar number and a username with the state bar, we can authenticate you through this gateway. So as long as you have a relationship with any of the vendors in the state, you can authenticate one time with your bar credentials and access all of these other vendors. So that's how it started, to answer that with e-filing. But as Justice Boggs referred to, there's a lot of other functions that we want to continue to add. So we need dedicated resources. The pilot is live, it's functional, it's in production. But to continue to add functions, to continue to maintain support, we're looking for additional funding.
And part of that, Mr. Chairman, is a position, $75,000 position, 122 with fringe, so the bulk of the 250, at least half of it is attributable to having someone that actually can manage this full-time. And it actually provides for a call center and at the AOC and web-based assistance as well.
Well, like a good lawyer, you're going right to the question I was gonna ask, to drill into this 250, because I really need to know what it is.
Yeah.
It's
So it's
to
122,000 is the position, 122,250. That's a $75,000 a year salary plus fringe. And then the bulk of everything else falls into contractual services, and that is for the vendors. So for Green Court and Tyler, for example, which are non-state contractual providers of some of these services across the state, we've got $106,000 allocated. In addition, we have some state organizations like DDS, for example, that would also be eligible for the $39,000 that is allocated in contractual services there. So that's the bulk of the money, is $122 for the salary, $106 for non-state contractual services, and roughly $40,000 for state organization contractual services. Again, every organization, every jurisdiction has their own vendor and has their own management information software, and for a lawyer in Waycross to be able to navigate that and find what they want, this would provide that sort of ability to just go one place, sign on one time, and all of the vendors have agreed to basically participate.
With all those speeding tickets that are accumulated between Athens and Atlanta, I was wondering if there wouldn't be a residual that goes back to help pay for the gateway.
Yeah.
It pay for the speedway and the gateway.
I'll let you fight that battle with the clerks, Mr. Chairman.
That's right. That's exactly right. All right. The next item on here, the requesting is the court process reporting system. If you would kindly speak to that request.
Yes, sir.
There, $78,885.
Again, the request $78,885, it is a request for the court process reporting systems. CPRS acronym provides for sharing of real-time child welfare data between the executive and judicial branches. I'm not sure if you all know, but in August of last year, in the fall of last year, for the first time, DFACS now provides that Special Assistant Attorney General's, that is the state's lawyer in these DFACS proceedings that is preparing and filing the orders in these cases, shall be required by DFACS to upload those CPSR or CPRS court orders in dependency, termination of parental rights, and other types of cases. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we get drawdown money and federal money through Title IV money, if you'll call it that, from the feds. But one of the things that they'll hold up that money for is that if these orders are not timely filed, that is the number one reason that we haven't been able to draw down that Title IV money. We're now, of course, a little more advanced in our ability to do this through technology. And because the SAGs are now required to file these termination of parental rights orders, dependency orders online in a more timely fashion, DFACS Director Tom Rawlings has indicated that you could see an increase of $1 million in Title IV money coming back to the state by virtue of the implementation of this sort of technology. So I think it's a win-win for the state. You get more timely reporting of the child welfare data between the organizations. This $78,000. Jerry Bruce is here for the Justice for Children Committee, which is the committee that is promoting the CPRS program.
Is this a duplication of the JDEC system that we're talking about within the juvenile courts?
No, it's
And why not?
so JDAX, and Jorge is here. You might be able to explain it better than I do. Question about JDAX and CPRS?
Mr. Chairman, no, JDEX.
Welcome back.
Yes, sir. The Juvenile Data Exchange Project, JDEX, is to pull in legal history for the juveniles into a state-level reporting system. We're working with a couple of the different vendors to get that piece.
Let me say this so that the committee's aware. So JDEX is gathering the juvenile data pieces so that a judge sitting in Cobb County will know what just happened to this juvenile if they were in Floyd County. Because we have 14 independent juvenile courts in this state, making sure that all the information concerning the criminal history of that youth that has been served is readily available to any other judge in the state that is now reviewing that youth. If you're not from that jurisdiction, you wouldn't have any reason to have access to that juvenile record. So,
But why would we include the dependencies, the terminations? Why would we not include that information in the JDEX system? Because I believe the Superior Courts are also going to have access to that
They are.
JDEX. That's
JDEX.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So why would we not combine those efforts and have one repository as opposed to creating another one? I mean, we constantly, we just talked about it with the Supreme Court about the Court of Appeals having their own IT unit and it's their own platform, and then the Supreme Court having its other platform.
Sure.
I don't think that a silo system is the best way to go, and especially when you're dealing with these kinds of child welfare issues. So I'm asking the question, but making a strong suggestion as well.
Jorge? Do you-
Well, JDEX, as originally proposed, was to complete the PDRAs and the DAIs, which are the detention assessment instruments and the predisposition risk assessment tools. That's what originated that project. We've brought in some additional reporting tools into it. How it compares to other existing projects or proposed projects, I really couldn't go into that.
Could it be built to accommodate these documents as well?
If it's pulling from additional systems, that's the idea behind JDEX, is a web service to be able to transfer documents and data.
Can we think about that a little bit?
Yes,
Sure,
Let's,
sure.
because it's been
Mandy?
discussed in the past, it just isn't.
Sorry, Chairman Ballinger, sorry. No, I just wanted to see if I had some concurrence from my juvenile justice chairwoman.
Yeah, the JDEX data, so this data, or these data that we're referring to in the CPRS are populating shines and dealing with the shine system that the juvenile courts are using, and DFACS is using. Some of this information is court-driven, some of it is lawyer-driven, and where that information ends up and how it might be assimilated and accumulated into one database is a good question, and we'll certainly ask the technical experts as to why maybe JDEX couldn't incorporate court orders in child dependency cases. The key, of course, is to get these orders up timely,
Yes.
so you can get your Title IV money.
That's right.
And that's very important. And it's important for a number of reasons. It's not just because of the monetary reason. Having those orders timely filed is important to the adjudication of the
You
case.
brought in reinforcements, I see.
I'm sorry, Chairman Welch, I'm Jerry Bruce with the Committee on Justice for Children. If
There
you'd
you
like
go.
to hear, I
Yes.
can give you just a very little bit of background that explains why we're in two different systems at the moment.
Please.
I don't know if that would be helpful or not.
Oh, yeah,
but-
we're asking.
So we built the CPRS system using federal grant funds. And the federal grant funds are restricted for use only for dependency and termination of parental rights stuff. It can't be used in juvenile justice matters at all. There's a pretty high divide there. So we're not allowed to use any of our federal grant funds that J4C oversees for juvenile justice issues. So we've never really incorporated any juvenile justice data in CPRS, except we did get permission to do a data sharing agreement with DJJ several years ago to allow CPRS to pull in from JTS, the data system that DJJ uses, the information on children who are in foster care who accumulate some type of delinquency proceeding.
Maybe those funds are not what we need. In other
Well-
words, I mean, maybe we ought to,
Yeah.
just because they're there.
I'm a firm believer in one-stop shops.
Yeah, that's, I mean, we're asking for gateway money
Right.
to consolidate services so that the public can go there and take advantage of a speeding ticket from all the way to filing their pleadings with the Supreme Court of the state of Georgia. And I'm not hearing simplification. I'm hearing diversification in a very narrow area. And so I'm going to keep posing this question. I don't think just because there's federal grant money that should be the answer, that we rely on.
Right.
What happens when that money's gone?
That's just how we got where we are, but it's
Okay.
not going to chart the course going
No, we
forward.
really need to institutionalize this program as a state-initiated program, not dependent upon the federal funding. And I think that's the question of what it would cost to do that is something else.
Mr. Bruce, thank you for that explanation. I do appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, that's the Judicial Council budget request for FY '20. 3 requests, again, prioritized based on the way they're listed in the budget. We would ask for your favorable consideration. I'm happy to answer other questions if you have any.
Other questions from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for you. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry, I
Yes, sir.
did have questions. This is going off script a little bit, but I want the committee to be aware that the AOC, the Administrative Office of the Courts, is overseen by the Judicial Council. And so the Judicial Council is made up of judges that sit as officials for representing their various courts and that are established and set forth as separate constitutional entities within the state. In 2014, an audit was requested by the House Appropriations Committee Chairman to look at what efficiencies could be gained in terms of the AOC, with a particular emphasis on greater cooperation amongst the various courts, going back to the concept that is contained within our Constitution, but it sometimes seems to be in words only, and that is a unified court system. So with that being said, the Department of Audits has also done a follow-up audit to review and see what has been implemented to respond to that 2014 audit and to see what steps, again, measurables, have been achieved since that time. So Ms. Clanton, would you please elaborate on that for us, because I wanted to give you an opportunity to
Yes.
speak to it, and I have some questions that bear upon that audit.
So based on that audit, we put together some measurements that we've been measuring, if you will, periodically to help us gauge how we're providing the services.
The previous audit had recommended that you develop and look to the National Center of State Courts. They have a 10 performance measures that can be utilized for efficiency within the courts, and these are designed to help the public achieve decisions in a timely fashion, to also save money, to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars, to be more efficient at turnaround of decisions, to demystify the judicial process as a whole. These are multiple measures, if you will, called the court tools.
Court tools, yes.
It's very cute the way they spell it, C-O-U-R capital T-O-O-L-S.
Right.
And at any rate, those 10 measures, but according to the Department of Audits, we're really not seeing an implementation of those
Court
10
tools.
court tools.
And those are designed to measure court performance. Our office is a service agency to the entire judiciary. So our business is providing fiscal services, budget, human resources, things like that, programs, help with different types of commissions and things like that. We're not in the court, so the court tools that you're referencing speak to the performance of the individual court. So it would be up to the courts to embrace those.
And
We have done some, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We've done some training in the past on those. Some of those have been incorporated in our strategic plan in the area of transparency. So we're working toward those through our strategic plan. But as far as our AOC, those would relate to the courts, and we're more of a statewide resource, if you will, for the various groups that use our shared services.
In terms of trying to oversee those efficiencies and provide administrative oversight or assistance with the courts, to what extent has the Judicial Council recommended that any one of these or all of these 10 court tools should be applied to the various courts of the state?
So again, it's been mentioned in our strategic plan, but it's up to the courts to adopt those individually if they decide to follow those.
And have any of our courts adopted any of those court tool measures?
I do not know the answer to that, but we can find out.
Okay. Well, we have some more courts coming up, so we'll be asking.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I wanted to check, make sure I saw everything there. I will note that the audit did, I think, give praise to the Judicial Council for frankly, under your leadership, Ms. Clanton, and I think the cooperation of all of those on the council, there has been a marked improvement in the cooperation amongst the courts, and I think that's a tribute to you as a director. So
Thank you.
I
It's
do
an
want to
honor.
know that. I'm drilling into some of these issues, but at the same
No,
time,
I
I don't
appreciate
also
it.
want to ignore the positive points that were made in the audit.
Thank you.
Any questions for our judicial council? All right, seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Next up, we have the public defenders. Jiminique Rogers is our interim executive director. It's a pleasure to get to meet her earlier, or late at the end of last year, and we are happy to see you here today.
Good morning, good afternoon now.
That's right, good afternoon. And Terry Radford is our director of finance, and she is back. Good to see you. And Brian, you just slide over that way. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, we're gonna let these ladies run the show here because they've been doing it, and I know doing a very good job. And Brian, I appreciate your service as director, previous director, and thank you for the time that you spent helping the citizens of the state and helping to revamp and re-energize the public defenders across the state. But right now, it's Jiminique Rogers' show, and so we are very happy to have you here. And if you would, we'll just ask you to go ahead and talk to us about your budget. Let me get to the right page for it, though.
On page 19.
Yeah, it's all the way back.
Yeah.
Section 37, okay. Thank you. Ms. Rogers, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman Welch and members of the committee. As you heard, I'm Jiminique Rogers. I'm the interim executive director of the Georgia Public Defender Council. And with me today at the table, I have Terry Rayford, our CFO, and our immediate past executive director, Brian Tyson, who's here and who's helping us with the transition as a consultant. I also like to recognize that we have out in our gallery today, we have a number of our circuit public defenders from across the state, as well as some of our executive team staff that we're happy to have with us today. They have come from all parts of the state, even some from court, to get here this morning. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss our budget with the committee today. We appreciate the support of the governor in making the recommendations that are reflected in this budget. Before we move to the two specific items on our tracking sheet, we'd like to give the committee an update on some of our long-term projects that we've had. We've heard that discussed today, some of the long-term projects for the agency. In the legislative session for 2017, Brian came and discussed with the committee that we were having a significant problem recruiting and retaining assistant public defenders. And there were a number of reasons for that. We've had 2 compensation studies now that talked about that problem. In FY 2016, our attrition rate was at 25% of all assistant public defenders. That's 1/4 of our staff out in the field over the course of one fiscal year. I'm happy to report today that in FY 18, that turnover rate had dropped to 22%, a reduction of 3%. On par as far as FY 19, we are now trending at a little over 19% for an attrition rate. Now that's just for the state-funded assistant public defenders. For county and state-funded APDs combined, we are a little over 17.5%. So we accredit that success in improving our recruitment and retention, which goes overall to helping us stabilize the operations of the agency, to several things. One, to the hard work of our circuit public defenders out in the field, to the governor, to the legislature, and specifically to the support of this committee, who's helped us with a number of our projects. And this is for the benefit especially of the newer members of the committee. This committee has supported our request for to be placed on parity with the assistant district attorneys for the salary schedule, also for dedicated funding for a training director and dedicated funds for training on a regular basis. So because of all of those projects that have been successful, we believe that we're continuing to move forward with improving overall our operations, which helps. I mean, we talk about the central office who's here represented today, but it really helps in the local criminal justice systems in the counties throughout the state. So with that, I'd like to turn toward 2 specific line items in the budget this year. I'll start with the additional agent-specific funds for Program 1, which is shown on line 37-1.5. There's $200,000 to increase funds for expenses and lost revenue associated with the expiration of the Fulton County contract. This is a request to replace the loss of the agency's budget of administrative fee revenue for a county personnel contract with Fulton County. Now, again, as context, especially for the newer members of the committee, a significant portion of the agency's budget comes from administrative fees, not state appropriated funds. It's $800,000 of our budget. Those administrative fees are generated because we contract with local counties and circuits to make county-funded personnel state employees. We call that program spacers, state-paid, county-reimbursed slots. Now, because of the tenuous nature of these contracts, they can be terminated any time. Another of our long-term projects is to move from relying on these administrative fees for our operating budget. Now, in this instance, what happened was one of those contracts was terminated, and it was terminated after the commencement of the FY19 year. So we found out the contract was terminated in December of 2018, which means that we lost an anticipated $100,000 of revenue for the fiscal year that we're currently in. For the next fiscal year, that amounts to $200,000. And we appreciate the governor's recognition of this and the move to introduce or recommend $200,000 for next year's budget to help shore up our overall budget. We also greatly appreciate the governor's recommendation to provide the funds for a merit-based pay adjustment for employee recruitment and retention. That's a total of $892,034. Those requests are shown on lines 37-1.1 and 37-2.1 of the tracking sheet. Those funds will continue to help us maintain parity with the prosecutors, and we obviously want to continue that. We've talked already about the successes we've had from projects like that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll end my narrative of the request and respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers, the point of parity is, I want to underscore it. When an individual is charged with a crime and he or she finds him or herself in the judicial system and proceeding under that pathway towards trial, in order to ensure that their constitutional rights are protected, it is important that both prosecutors and public defenders do their respective jobs in that process in order for there to be a fair and complete administration of justice. And when that is not being done because one group is paid better than another, or it's easy to make transfers in and out and there's agency jumping, that undermines the degree of skill, knowledge, and aptitude that is being provided to citizens within the state. And so this committee has been diligent in trying to ensure that both our public defenders and our prosecuting attorneys are on parity and are increasing in terms of their, relatively speaking, and very modest increasing in their salaries to address this retention issue that's been plaguing both agencies. And what you've heard from our interim director is that has been successful. So those steps that we have taken together as a subcommittee, along with the entire House and then the Senate, has been successful in improving retention rates, and that is a positive, I think, a positive statement for our judiciary. Representative Belton? Okay. So I just wanted to underscore that because it's very important. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll get back right with you, President. Mr. Trump, I'll talk with him a little later.
Okay.
Just wanted to, first, good to have you, and certainly, Brian, thank you for all you've done. When I came to the legislature, we had not reformed the system. And to use the word disgrace would be an understatement. Every lawyer that couldn't make a living at home had a buddy system, and they'd walk into court with somebody's case they'd never bothered to look at and plead them guilty. It was a shame, and it's so much better now. And to bring parity certainly was a giant step, but I'm proud of what has happened here. I look forward to seeing what the future will look like, as I'm sure it will continue to grow. But thank you, because a lot of people started getting justice a few years ago from competent lawyers because of the things that you all are doing and because of what this legislature did in funding up to parity. Thank you again.
A couple of questions. In looking at line item 37.1.5 with Fulton County, do you know, or were you given a reason for why Fulton County did not renew the contract?
That contract, the employees that were on it were county funded, and now they have transitioned to being straight county funded at this point. So they're no longer paying the benefit rate for as being state employees. So the system still stands, but is being operated solely by the county.
Okay. All right. Other questions? All right, well, seeing none, then we appreciate you all being here today. Thank you for that. What I'd like to do is just take a brief recess to let individuals stretch their legs. So if we will, just take 10 minutes. I'll see you back here at 4:17, and we'll start up again with PAC, Council of Juvenile Court Judges, and Council of Superior Court Judges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
a long time ago, so you're catching up with me, but I'm glad to see you here. It's, since I've been doing this job, the one constant in PAC has always been you, and it's always been nice to see you. Now, what I'd like to do is just go ahead and turn it over to Pete. No. Well, Chairman Ballinger, thank you for bringing in the director. You had an entourage just for walk you right in.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. And as you've told people, I'm Pete Skandalakis. I'm the executive director for the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Sitting with me is Bert Poston. Bert is our former chair of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. He's the DA in the Conasauga Circuit, and he's now our budget chair. And sitting next to Bert is George Hartwig, who's the DA in the Houston Judicial Circuit and is now the chair of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Sitting in the audience behind me is Lee Dara. Lee is the district attorney in Hall County. And also we have Mark Williams, who is the CFO of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. And we have the budget in front of you here today. I want to thank this committee for its past support. You've always been very good to us, and you've always been very gracious in the manner you treat us. And thank you for the opportunity to address you here today. I will turn it over first to Bert and let Bert talk about the DA's program of the budget, and then I'll address the PAC program of the budget, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Pete. I would echo everything that Pete has said. Y'all have certainly been very good to us over the years, and we appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to be heard. As is usual the case in the last few years, our top priority and what we want to spend the most time talking about is our assistant DA pay. Prior to 2008, we had a consistently funded career pay scale, and we had a system of career prosecutors, veteran prosecutors in the state. Because of inconsistent funding and non-funding of that pay scale over the last 10 years, we have really lost it still exists on paper, but as a practical matter, we have lost the career path for prosecutors. And as a result, we've lost a lot of good prosecutors. High turnover, is similar to what's mentioned by the Public Defender's Office, and difficulty in recruiting new talent when we do not have a consistent pay scale for them. Last year, coming out of the budget process, there was a request to DOAS to do a compensation study looking specifically at assistant DAs and assistant public defenders. That comes on top of a 2016 study that looked at all judicial pay, including judges and elected officials as well. And so where we are is we are asking for $3.8 million to fund transition to a new modernized pay scale that would be competitive with other state law enforcement, with other lawyers in the state, and to set the groundwork for a fair career ladder going forward in future budget years, to allow those attorneys to be paid appropriately now, allow us to increase the bottom end of that pay scale sufficiently to recruit new talent, and then with your help going forward, again, to provide that incremental funding to keep people on the pay scale. So when they're making a decision after a year or two in the DA's office if they want to stay or they want to go make money in the private sector, they can at least look at that scale and say, okay, if I stay another 5 years or 10 years, I'm going to be up at this level, assuming I do everything I need to do to qualify for those promotional increases. So I can afford to buy a house, I can afford to raise a family, and so forth. Right now, we're losing the people in the middle that are trying to raise families and can't. I've lost 2 or 3 good people because after their second child, they just can't afford to continue to work for me when there's so many opportunities out there to make more money in the private sector. If I could keep moving them up that pay scale, then we would be okay. So, again, the new pay scale addresses a lot of the recommendations that came out of that study. The principal recommendation of that study being that if we fund the pay scale and if we fund a career path for prosecutors, a lot of the other issues that they see either take care of themselves or at least sufficiently mitigated by just funding that pay scale. So that's our priority and where we want to go, and that's what that money is for. The public defenders mentioned parity between the two programs for salaries for assistant DAs and assistant public defenders. We supported that when that was implemented. I think there's already been some talks about if we receive the funding to adopt and move to a new pay scale, certainly working with public defenders and probably next year's budget cycle through the governor's office to try to move them to that same pay scale as well. We do steal from each other's offices. We do, of course, obviously leave a lot to the private sector, but we support being on that same pay scale and having that career path for both sides, so that both the person who's charged with a crime and the victim of crime are receiving the services of a career attorney, and not someone who's a few months out of law school and just trying to get some court experience before they go on to the next phase of their career. So that's the biggest part of our budget and our top priority for the budget. I'll be glad to answer any questions about that now or at the end of the presentation.
Let me go ahead and grab this question from Vice Chair Rogers.
Yeah, just educated guess, I guess, probably the best way. You guys have any type of informational data about maybe what the average length of time an ADA stays in the state of Georgia?
If we don't, we can certainly get that data.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking 3 years, 5 years, 35 years? I mean, you know.
I can tell you just from my career, when I interned in my DA's office in 1990, and by 1992, the only attorneys left were the elected DA and the chief assistant. Every other assistant DA had rolled over in 2 years.
Yeah, it's a very short term, isn't it?
Well, it was. Now, in the 90s, we established a career path, and we started seeing much reduced turnover, and we have a lot of career prosecutors. But those first wave of career prosecutors are now within 5 to 10 years of retiring. What we've lost in the last 10 years is that next wave. So 5 to 10 years from now, we'll start seeing large numbers of retirements, and we won't have that next wave of veterans to run the offices and to bring along the next group. So we have new people that we've hired in the last few years, largely out of law school. There's a lot of turnover in that group. We have the veterans that are invested in the retirement system and in their career.
Getting ready to leave, yeah.
They're not going to leave, but we've lost that middle. And so I'm really concerned if we don't redevelop that middle, when the veterans retire, we're going to be in trouble. So that's really what we're trying to do, is jumpstart that career path again and try to get it going, so we redevelop that broad middle level of prosecutors.
So the word would be consistency.
Correct. And it's fundamentally a public safety issue and a victim services issue. You know, if a member of your family is a victim of a crime, you want a career prosecutor representing them. If someone's charged with a crime, you want a career public defender representing them. So,
Mr. Poston, did Mr. Williams did you have a number? The number of years?
I think we'll have to get that.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Yeah. Good question.
Okay. So now, related to that, I'm going to skip down to one of the smaller items on our budget is $280,000 for investigators. Everything I've said about the ADAs applies to them as well. They were not included when state law enforcement got the substantial raises a couple of years ago. So we had kind of a two-step process to move them to a new pay scale. 2 years ago, the first phase of that was funded. We did move them to that new scale. This money would be to continue to correctly place them on that scale, some of the ones that have been here longer that are underfunded on that scale. But otherwise, essentially the same process. It just completes something we've already started with our investigators. That leaves on the DA side of the budget $1.5 million that is for state-paid juvenile court prosecutors. The juvenile code was rewritten in, I believe it was 2015 that passed. And there was a commitment at that point to fund on the public defender side and the state side, state-paid prosecutors and public defenders for juvenile court. That's been funded at a rate of 10 to 15 per year. Since then, there are 15 circuits on the DA side that don't have those, and that's what we've asked for, is those remaining 15 on our side. I imagine there's also some circuits on the public defender side that don't have them, although they don't operate in every single circuit. So I don't know what that number is, but anyway, that's what that money would be to fund the final 15 ADAs and the 15 circuits that don't have one.
Well, let me say that PAC has been very helpful in when sometimes we'll get the budgets, and the budgets don't align with some of the policy decisions we've been championing. And that parity and the fairness between the two entities, PDs and ADAs, we've had to come in and make adjustments to our budget to keep that parity in place because money wasn't placed in the budget through the governor's office. So we've made those adjustments, and those have been honored. They've been honored by the Senate, and then they've also been honored by the governor. So I just say that to tell you that I appreciate the cooperation that we've had over the time working on these issues jointly. The request that's being made is significant, and it is good to see it in the governor's budget. I will point out that the governor and the House have every single session for the last 4 been in lockstep on trying to make this a reality. The unfortunate side is that the chamber across the rotunda has not, and that frankly just needs to change. It becomes.
You guys could prosecute that.
No comment.
Yeah, no, yeah.
We are on tape, right?
Yeah, we are. But I would encourage the Senate to pay heed to this request and to make this manifest. This has dragged on way too long. And this was not an unreasonable request when it began. It was an incremental request that was made over a planned 3-year pacing. The House in the first year, we were not able to make it work that particular year, if I recall correctly. But we have since worked on that stepwise increase, and it has not been all that's been requested. And so even with this amount of money that's here, it would not put them on the level that was originally requested, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
So this is, again, this is almost PAC negotiating against itself in a way at this number. But I want that to be clear that these numbers are much lower than what would have been had we followed the request that you'd have made initially. So I would urge the Senate to bring this to a close and approve this request in the budget, at least as to the $3.8 million that's requested to achieve that pay scale adjustment that is needed.
Yeah, I can actually tell you to complete the original plan as envisioned at this point would take about $7 million. We felt like that was an unrealistic amount to ask for, so we've we backed up, and we just need something. We need a good foundation to move forward on, and that's what we're asking for.
And I'll just say that, I mean, this isn't true across the state, but it is more pronounced in your metropolitan areas, whether that's Atlanta, Savannah, Chatham, Macon, Bibb, Augusta, Richmond, et cetera. The private sector market for new attorneys coming in is notably higher than what your entry level pay scale is for PAC. The advantages are the fringe benefits, the security, the focus of the job, the public service that one is providing, which is very significant, both to our constitutional democracy, but also within each community. And so it goes without saying that these are folks that are willing to take a little bit less in terms of a salary because of the passion that they have for the job, for the long-term benefits. And what makes a difference is being able to see into the future what your income will be going forward. And if that is unknown or uncertain, then people will go to try to hang up their own shingle and carve out their own futures. So I appreciate your service, and I appreciate the request that you're making here. I just hope the Senate will heed this request as we pass it along to them if the subcommittee so chooses to move this money forward.
Thank you.
Questions from members of the committee? This final request of the 15 attorneys, and I've got a request here, a comment, the 15 additional ADAs, that will close out the numbers that are needed to ensure that every circuit has at least one ADA for juvenile courts. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Vice Chairman Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me, gentlemen. Thank you for your presentation. Forgive me if I missed this. What would one coming out of college and a young attorney wants to come in and be an assistant ADA? What can they expect? And is that regionally, or is it the same one that's going to be in Toombs County? Going to expect the same as in Douglas and Paulding?
The state pay is going to be the same regardless. It starts at $44,828, which is lower than some state law enforcement agencies' starting pay for non-lawyers. Significantly lower than the average of county paid assistant DAs and county paid solicitor generals, their starting pay. There are, in larger metro areas, there's some county supplementation of that, but there's a number of circuits that don't provide any supplement to that, particularly in the rural areas. They're just looking at that $44,828.
Thank you.
Good question. Vice Chair Rogers.
I guess Mike had just struck a chord with me on something like that. I'm sitting there thinking, $45,000 a year, you're going to have a hard time paying your student loan back coming out of law school. Is there are we doing anything whatsoever to help with loan repayment or anything like that?
At the state level, I'm not aware of anything. The last time we reviewed our people a couple of years ago, the average attorney that had student loan debt had approximately $100,000 of student loan debt. I believe that's correct. There's a federal program, but I think it's somewhat in limbo as to where it's going.
So it's nothing from a state standpoint that if you serve as, is that anything that we've ever really explored as far as like if you public defender or ADA or something like that?
I do believe there's some legislation, but it's never been funded, and it's on the books, but it's just, there's never been enough money there to really look at that, or some type of loan forgiveness. Obviously, somebody wants to be repaid even through loan forgiveness.
Sure.
But not through the state level.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm saying you're sitting there making $45,000 a year plus a county supplement or something like that, and you're trying to repay $150,000, $200,000 worth of loans. Sorry, those numbers just don't add up. Okay.
There was a federal forgiveness if you worked for 10 years in one of these positions, then the loans could be forgiven, and it may not have been the full amount, but it was up to a percentage of it. So there was that incentive, but Mr. Poston is right that since we've been discussing this, which has been the last 4 years that I've been doing this, it's never been funded. So it's on the books, but it's of no consequence.
Thank you.
Good question.
I'm gonna, if that's all the questions about the DA side, I'm gonna turn it over to Pete about the council budget. There's one element.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, there's just one item on the council budget that we've asked you to consider, and that's $130,232 for IT support, and that goes to our tracker system. And I don't know how many of you know, but in 2007, after looking at what it would cost us to get a canned program for case management, we came to the legislature, and you gave us some startup money to start a program called Tracker, which is a case management system now employed by DAs and Solicitor Generals. It's now used in 155 of 159 counties. It's one of the great success stories, I think, of the legislature putting some seed money out there and then seeing what can happen. We now have 155 counties, 2,780 prosecution staff in Georgia that use Tracker in some form or another. We also use it, the legal secretaries use it, the investigators use it. We use it to track victim services, so we can apply for our VOCA grants and our VAWA grants. It's a great program, and we definitely need to add an additional person to our Tracker support system. We're going to use it to do public-facing website that'll make information available to those outside of prosecution and law enforcement and other criminal justice agencies. And we're also going to use it to work on our electronic discovery. Right now, our Tracker system is basically run by 3 contract personnel who work out of the PAC offices, and they service the entire state. As more prosecution officers want to come on board, there's a greater demand, and our services are really being pushed to the max. So that's something we'd like you to consider. Its base salary would be around $80,000 plus benefits. If you see fit, we could do less than the $130,000 and do contract personnel, but that's what we're trying to do.
So you're wanting to bring on a full-time person and swap out the contracts, or keep
No,
the
sir,
con-
we would still use the contract person.
So you're gonna pay someone to manage your tracker system at $80,000, almost twice what you pay an entry-level lawyer to prosecute cases.
Yes, sir.
No? Not at that salary. Yes, yeah. I thought you were buying a
Or
bass.
have some computer background, right?
I thought it was a bass boat. All right, well, any questions about the tracker system or this position? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your
Thank you.
presentation.
One thing we forgot to mention was the,
Oh, well, that's okay, we can save money that way.
Mike, would you come up? And I apologize
I
for
always
this.
say, if you're
The
if you're
council,
not at the table, you're on the menu, right?
council superior court clerks have a, I guess, a pass-through that comes through PAC, so Mike, if you'll come up here.
All right, Mike, Ms. Holman, have a seat. Thank you.
I'll make this very brief. Yes, 10 years ago, I think most of you remember the budgetary climate at that time. The Council of Superior Court Clerks, like every other group in the state, took several significant hits. This money that we have in the budget this year would bring us back to where we were in 2008. It is to support the 159 Superior Court clerks, fully a third of whom are in counties that are so small and understaffed that in some cases they are the sole employee of that office, and we are their only resource to provide them assistance and training, and we hope to increase that in a small amount.
Any questions for Mr. Holloman? All right.
Thank you.
Now, the amount you have here is for one person, so this is gonna be all the fringe benefits included in the 64, right?
We actually have enough in our regular appropriation, the 182, because we will also be paying this position. It'll start at 50 and it will have about 20, 25 in benefits. So there's a little extra above that. We can't retain a person for just that amount, but that amount coupled with current budget, we can do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
All right.
it.
That's next one on the agenda is our Council of Juvenile Court Judges. Judge James Whitfield is here. And you know Eric John is our Executive Director, and Kirsten Wallace is the Budget Director. So welcome. And I'll let you go ahead and take it off. We're going to be at page 7, section 7 of your track sheet. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as you've indicated, I am Judge Jim Whitfield. I'm a senior juvenile court judge now, recently retired last year. I am here filling in for Judge Spivey, who's our president of our Council of Juvenile Court Judges. He's out ill today with a yet-to-be-identified bug. So I'm glad to be able to be here. I want to thank this committee for all of your support that we've had in the past. As you've indicated, Eric John, our executive director, is here. Kirsten Wallace, our budget expert. We've got some other staff here that they'll introduce as we go forward. So I want to turn it over to them now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I wanted to go ahead and introduce, we have two support staff out in the audience. Kimberly Tolbert, she's our statewide CHINS coordinator. And then Shavante White, she's the assistant DA, JDAI, state coordinator. They're here to answer any questions that may come up about those two programs. I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the budget request, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. The first request that we're requesting is $40,000. That's for education for national and state conferences for judges and for staff. That's actually the 2% enhancement that Governor Deal had recommended agencies request in the 2020 budget. Do you want me to keep going, Mr. Chairman? Okay. The second request is a repeated request that we've asked for the last 2 sessions. It's for the JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative statewide coordinator position. That position is currently being funded by DJJ to our agency from funds from DJJ, and we are requesting those funds so it'll be state funding within the agency. The assistant coordinator position is already state funding, so we just want to make that position state funding as well to match. Then we go to the grants to counties program, which is the juvenile court judges salary grants. We are requesting for the new judgeships for the Griffin and Gwinnett judicial circuits. Those 2 Superior Court judgeships added will increase the juvenile court judges' salary grants per the formula. I know that the 2 bills that have been dropped actually are requesting that those judgeships start January 1st, 2020. So actually the funding that we're requesting, the $50,000, can be reduced to $25,000. And then the last is like a housekeeping item. It's for the increase for the judicial retirement system percentage of the employer share. And then and then after the budget submission, we were notified that the Ogeechee Judicial Circuit is going to be requesting the grants to counties pursuant to the code section. Currently, they do not receive the grant. The Superior Court judgeships are over the juvenile court, but we did hear from Superior Court Judge Peed that they are hiring 2 juvenile court judges to start as of July 1st. So that will entitle that circuit for $100,000. All right. And then I'll answer any questions that the chairman or committee might have.
Questions from members of the committee? On the coordinator position, you already have do you already have a current coordinator for that, in that position, doing the JDAI?
Yes, it's a mouthful. Yes, we have a statewide coordinator, and then we have an assistant coordinator position. This is the assistant coordinator that is with us today, Shavante White.
Okay. So we have an assistant coordinator's position, and this would be another assistant, or this would be the?
It's current. She's actually with our agency already. DJJ pays for her salaries.
Okay.
Her salary. I invoice DJJ each month.
I got you. Okay.
She's been with our agency for, I think,
What's her
3
name?
years.
What's her name?
Whitney Temple.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your presentation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
For sticking it out and slogging through with us.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just add at any time, if you'd like, in your office explanation of the 2 systems, the CPRS and JDEX, and why they're separate, I could talk to you about that.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to get a larger group of people together than just one-on-one. I think we need to look at this from all the parties together.
Right. Okay.
And so I'm going to encourage that, John, that you do that, and get with Ms. Clanton and Justice Boggs and Jose and what was the general?
Jorge. Yeah.
Jorge. What was his last name?
Basto.
Baston. Okay, and then also. And let's see, we can get with Jerry Bruce as well. And I think that we need more people talking together on that issue. I mean, I expect to examine this very closely on both budgets and maybe make some decisions that will force the issue. But I appreciate the ask. Thank you, Eric, very much. All right, with that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the Council of Superior Court Judges. And we are honored to have Judge Stephen Kelly here today. The council president, we have Mr. Richard Denning as our first district court administrator. and then Mr. Charles Miller with our budget management. So thank you so much for being here again. And we'll turn it over to you all. We're on, I think we're on 10, is it not 9? Section 9 of our budget. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate all that y'all do. First item on ours is 9.31, which is increased adjustment for our contribution to the judicial retirement system. The next two items are, of course, the judgeship in Griffin and Gwinnett Circuit, which have now passed the House and are over at the Senate. And I'll come back to that because I sparked my interest, Mr. Chairman, when you talked about core tools, and I do sit on the workload assessment committee, so if you have any questions about those two judgeships, but of course, core tools is instrumental in the workload assessment committee, which decides whether or not new judgeships are needed.
Y'all made adjustments recently. I noticed that there was adjustments made in how we were looking at the measurables and the data collection from clerks. I think that was done over the summer, I believe.
Right. These two judgeships are on the old system.
Right.
But I believe you're Flint, aren't you? If you represent Flint, so it's like number one if that's.
Yeah, we're 1 or 2.
1 or 2 for next year.
We were 1 in 2008, and we're 1 again. That doesn't mean we're going to get any money.
9.34 is where we talked about the 5-year strategy plan. In Georgia, we have 214 Superior Court judges. The state provides 87 law clerks for judges. Of that, however, there's another 82 county-paid law clerks. So there's 45 judges that have no access to law clerks whatsoever in this state. The starting pay for a law clerk is $42,116 or $66, I think. So, but we're not asking for any kind of increase in that, but we are at a 5-year plan to try to at least have every Superior Court judge, whether it's through a county or a state paid, access to a legal assistant. And then, so that's why they're asking for the 10 positions. In today's world.
What's the starting pay for the law clerks?
$42,000.
42,000?
42,000. That's the only pay for them. There's no starting or there's no increase at all.
Right.
So if you decided to stay for more than a year or so, we've had a very difficult time. I mean, with those counties out there, the rural counties that did not want to have trouble supplementing, my circuit basically doubles that salary in order to get career path staff attorneys. So we've gotten to the point now in the legal field, we're on the bench, probably around 4 days a week in my circuit. And most of that's criminal, probably 60 to 90, 80% of it's criminal work. But then, of course, all your civil caseload is still coming in. Your domestic caseload is still coming in. Of course, you have to be on the bench for most of the domestic, but and then the orders now that were, it used to be for a motion for new trial, a judge just said, after hearing evidence argument, motion for new trial is denied, granted, and that was it. Well, now in almost every case, ineffective assistance is an issue. Well, then that requires the judge to go back to the criminal case and scour the record and basically write quite a long. I just did a motion for new trial in a case that I did. It was a murder case. My motion for new trial order was 45 pages, and it was just argued in front of the Supremes last week. We have the Owens rule came down from the Supreme Court, which is now, requiring a case management of all these motions for new trial so they don't linger for 10 years. Of course, Chairman, you're familiar, of course, with motions for summary judgments. They're e-filing in. It's not uncommon to have exhibits attached, might be thousands of pages. Well, if you're on the bench 4 days a week, it's hard to actually take a look at all that. And that's why it's important that most judges in very litigious areas around the state need staff attorneys, and not just even law students. But right now, we're just trying to, take one little step at a time. And part of our 5-year plan, which was suggested by this committee, we took to heart, would be then just to try to divide that up. And we've got 45, I said, and so we just started saying 10 a year. And it's just at least try to get every judge access to some help. The last, of course, is $30,000 reduction based upon the funds from the Northeastern Judgeship. Do y'all have any questions?
To what extent does the council look at a precipitous drop in caseload as to whether or not there's a particular judgeship, not particular, but the judgeship position needs to be retained? In other words, where we've
Right.
had significant population shifts and possibly
There are-
corresponding drops in the cases that are filed within a particular circuit, to what extent do we look at maybe combining circuits, or maybe not recommending that the position be filled at a later date?
Yep. So it's not the council is not charged with, it's the Workload Assessment Committee, which is part of the Judicial Council under AOC. And looking at that, we have, of course, there are several circuits. No circuit can have less than 2 judges. So you might have a couple rural circuits out there where there's, 4 or 5 counties and they only have 2 judges. Well, if their numbers drop, you can't get below 2 judges by law. And and looking at it, that seems to be where the issue is.
Like to.
So I think the only response that would be try to combine circuits actually. That brings on a whole new set of problems, but.
Well, we're here to solve them.
It's interesting. I mean, it's the workload assessment, and they talk about the core tools. That's been a big part of the Workload Assessment Committee, and because they come out of the National Center for State Courts, and the 10 standards that they set, are very interesting. I personally, I was in prosecution for 24 years. And so 14 as a DA, so I was a chairman of PAC when we did trackers. I've always been very technology oriented. Ran one of the most technology advanced DA circuits in the state. When I got to be a judge, though, I went back 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because as judges, our case management systems are the clerks of court. And I have one county, Appleton County, they had no computer system, and now they've only had a computer system for 2 years. And so having 5 different computer systems, being able to access those computer systems do not talk to each other. So there's no way to generate effective case management reports. So of course, now with e-filing being thrown in here, there's, it's kind of very interesting. It's good in one sense, but very dangerous in another.
Maybe our EMC broadband initiative might help out with Appleton County.
So they do have a computer system now, and so we are happy for that. So,
well, thank you, Judge. I appreciate that, and I mean that's disheartening to know no computer system available to the judge in Appleton County as they're rotating through the circuit. So, but I would like you to take a look at that, the issue, and maybe it needs to be
as a reduction.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, I think it's
if you look, adding caseload. We're talking about adding, but I think we also have to look at the system where we have a reduction in caseload. What does that?
See,
impact?
it's not just caseload though that determines it. For instance, like in our circuit, our circuit's 155 miles long. So Judge Burt Guy lives in St. Mary's. Our former chief judge Ian Wilkes lives in Hazelhurst. They're 150 miles apart. So when Judge Guy goes to Hazelhurst to hold court, it's a 2 hours and 15-minute ride if there's no issues. So he spends 4.5 hours just in the car, and that's probably keeping the speed limit, maybe sort of, but so 4.5 hours in the car. So the number of cases he can handle in a day, versus a judge who's a single county circuit is totally different.
And
so it's not caseload alone is not sufficient to determine adequate resources.
Well, but are you telling me you're not factoring in the drive time?
You do factor it in some, but it's not. But how you factor that in is so AOC comes up. The workload assessment has kind of quite a lengthy length. We just recently started factoring in, of course, drug court cases, so that once it used to be when I pled a felony case in, I spent about 10 minutes on the guilty plea if it was just a routine plea. Once I started doing drug court, then I had that person for 2 years. And so I went from being with him for 10 minutes, you know, to hours over a
How's
course
he
of 2
doing?
years.
How's he doing?
So the drug court cases.
No, how's that individual doing?
The individual. So no, we have pretty good success rate in drug court.
Good.
Actually, really do. It's been very successful, but it is very judge intensive, and which has caused a lot of issues for that. And we have started making some adjustments. But I think as we move,
And that's being reflected now in the new workload assessment, right?
right.
So
And I'm all about the case management and the core tools and stuff. And I think, you know, of course, you know, the state really needs a way to accurately look at, you know, cases statewide. And as technology is increasing, there's technologies out now there that can go into any kind of database. And I think perhaps with the criminal data exchange program that's working, that'll also have some impact on our ability to access data and stuff.
thank you, Judge. There are no questions for you. We appreciate. What's that? Oh, Judicial Administration District. That's
Richard,
right. Yeah.
we have DC.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Our request is a budget enhancement of $225,472. This request is to provide funds for an adjustment to the agency-approved merit plan. The current DCA step levels are broken down into 7 steps currently. Since a DCA is not considered an entry-level position and requires extensive experience, it is unlikely for a DCA today to reach the final step. The administrative systems positions have a step plan broken down into 7 steps as well. And with reducing both of the 7 steps to 5-step levels increases the salary at a more appropriate rate for the experience levels that are required.
So you're reducing down the step levels to 5?
Yes,
and
sir.
then increasing the amount of money paid for each level?
Yes, sir.
If you would, just provide Brian a copy of exactly the step breakdown.
I've got it. Oh, he's got it.
All right, good. Okay, anything else?
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate you being here. The surviving members of our committee, Chairman Belton, thank you very much. I'll have to treat you to dinner sometime. And our Vice Caucus Chairman, Bradley, thank you so much for sticking out. And I know that Chairman Ballinger at 5, I know she has to go, but she stayed the duration of our planned time, and I very much appreciate that. It will be noted. So if you have fantastic budget requests, just, you know, send them my way. I'll see what I can do, pull some strings for you. I'm just kidding. Representative Belton. Thank you very much for everyone being here today. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your hard work and your public service.